the idea that we need a little earthly temple there when you've got to the end and you have the whole of creation as God intended it as the temple. You don't need a little earthly temple anymore. That was just a little picture. That was a teaching tool, really, for God's people to show them what his plan was, that eventually God's people would be able to worship him in the creational temple forever and ever. So you look at the temple, you see all of the garden imagery in the temple. You see the gold, which reflects the glory of God as it was originally in the creation. You see the priests going about their service, doing the very thing that Adam was called to do in the temple, to work it and to keep it. And then that's kind of where you're left off with the picture of the temple. But that's not the end point. The goal for God's people was never simply that they would always have this earthly temple and that they would worship there just in that one place. So creation is a temple. If we're going to talk about new creation, we had to understand first what was God's design for the original creation. So that's the answer to why was he talking about a temple so much? What was God's original design for the heavens and the earth that he has made? We have to understand that first before we can understand what the new heavens and the new earth will be, what the new creation will be. Now, sin got in the way, right? Adam could have joyfully served as a priest in the creational temple. And he could have gone about that work of taking dominion over the earth, of spreading the garden presence of the Lord to the four corners of the earth. He could have done that joyfully. He could have done that and received the blessing of God. He could have extended the presence of God, or maybe even better to say that God extending the presence of himself through Adam to the whole earth. And then eventually it would have covered the whole earth. And we don't know exactly how this would work out. We don't know if there was a certain point. Maybe if Adam had simply resisted Satan's temptation, the serpent in the garden, that might have been enough. It might have been at that point that God would have just simply made the world into a temple. But I think it's more likely that once he had passed that test, that there would no longer be a possibility of sin, and then he could have gone about his work, take dominion over the earth, spread the temple presence of the earth to the whole earth, and then finally God would be able to take that earth and even bring it into the higher state of things, the final state of things that we see in Revelation. There's mystery there. We don't know exactly what God would have done or how he would have done it because Adam sinned, and at that point, Adam can't do that anymore. He can't serve as the priest in the temple and bring it about on his own. Right? He can't, as a sinner, fulfill God's plan. But God doesn't abandon his plan. He doesn't shift to plan B and decide, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to forget about the creation. I'm just going to trash this world that I've made, and I'm going to save souls, and that's it. The world doesn't matter anymore. No, God is still going to bring about his plan. But now God has to do that as an act of his own redemption. He still involves man in that. We don't know back then in Genesis 3, we don't know how that's going to happen. But we know that God is going to use man in his plan, in God's own work of redemption. It's the seed of the woman, after all, who will crush the head of the serpent. It's a descendant of Eve who will be the means that God uses to finish his plan for the world. And the people of God, they wait. You can see this. You go to any number of figures in the Old Testament. Even after Cain kills Abel, right? And then they have another child. Adam and Eve have Seth, and Eve is wondering, is this the seed? Or with Noah, Noah's father names him Noah. Noah is like the Hebrew word for rest. And what his father Lamech is wondering is this the one who will give us rest? Is this the one? Is this the seed? Is this whom God is going to use to finally bring about his ultimate purposes? Is this the one that will rescue us, that God will use to rescue us? The people of God, they're waiting. They continue to wait and wait and wait upon the Lord to fulfill his promise of a seed. But there are also some really powerful ways in which God shows us throughout the Old Testament that he hasn't forgotten about his original plan, that he hasn't shifted over to something new. He's not going to trash this world that he's made. He's going to himself bring it to its ultimate conclusion. One of those is some really powerful ways in which we see some foreshadowing of the redemption that God is going to bring about. And I would even say it this way. We see little glimpses of the new creation to come throughout the Old Testament. And the way we see that is in later stories in the Bible. Those later stories are told in a way that takes us back to the original creation. And we could even say that they are little glimpses of the new creation to come. They are ways in which God is reminding his people throughout history that he is going to make everything new. He is going to fix what Adam has ruined through his sin. And the first of these is in the flood story. And that might be the most dramatic of all of these. So this is in the flood story in Genesis, starting in Genesis 7. And I'm going to just mention a few aspects of this in Genesis 7 and 8 in particular. So I'd put it this way, really. The flood story and the aftermath of the flood is told in such a way as to take you back to the original creation and to show you that God himself is restoring things, that God himself is making things new. There's a whole new world that comes out of the flood. The Apostle Peter actually describes it that way in 2 Peter. He says that there was a world that existed. He says the world that then existed. This is in 2 Peter 3. And he contrasts that world that then existed before the flood with a new world that emerges out of the flood. What is that? Well, it's a divine act, really, of new creation. God essentially destroys the old world in the flood. Not physically, the world doesn't cease to exist, but he judges that old world and he brings a new world out of that, through the flood. There are a lot of little clues, if you get into the details of the flood story, where you see this, where you see that there's a direct comparison back to the original creation story. So what do we see at creation? We see that the waters are covering the whole earth. When God makes the world is covered in water. Right? The entire world is covered with water. Well, what is the state of the world after this judgment has come in the flood? Genesis 7, in verse 24, the waters prevailed on the earth. The waters have come to cover the entire earth. You've gone back to that original state where water covered the whole earth after the flood. In Genesis 1:2, at the very beginning, the Spirit of God, the Ruach in Hebrew, the Spirit of God is hovering over the face of the waters. In the flood story, in Genesis 8:1, we read, but God remembered Noah, so this is after the waters have come to cover the whole earth, God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark, and God made a wind to blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. Now you think, okay, well, that doesn't sound like that has anything to do with what he just said with creation. Well, the word for wind in Hebrew is ruach. It's the same word. The Spirit was hovering over the waters. The ruach was hovering over the waters at the original creation. God causes a ruach to blow over the waters that have come to cover the whole earth again after the flood. And what does that do? Well, when he causes that ruach, or that wind, to blow over the earth, the waters subside. In creation, the dry land emerges out of the waters. It appears out of the waters. That's Genesis 1, verses 9 and 10. And this earth is called, or this land is called the earth, the Eretz. In Genesis 8:14, we read, in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. The earth had dried out. And it uses a verb for had dried out, which is the same word that is used for the dry land that emerged in the original creation. So the earth has dried out. It's taking us straight back to creation. Right? The waters now are subsiding, and dry land is appearing once again. Remember, of course, that Moses wrote both of these. He wrote Genesis 1, he wrote Genesis 8. He's deliberately, under divine inspiration, he's deliberately taking us back to the original creation. Well, what happens once dry land has once again emerged? Once the ruach has blown over the waters and the dry land again emerges, well, a new world has emerged. A new creation has come out of that judgment of the flood. At the original creation, then, God makes the animals, Genesis 1, 24 and 25. It's very interesting. If you go to Genesis 7 and you look at the judgment in verses 20 to 23, when it describes all the animals, it deliberately describes them in terms of how they were described at creation. Verse 21, and all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Those were the exact categories that were used to describe the original animals at creation. Now, emerging from the ark into this new world, Genesis 8:17, bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. It's exactly like at the original creation. The same categories of animals, and they're told to do the same thing, to start swarming on the earth and to start filling the earth, and even to take dominion in the earth, or to be a part of that human taking of dominion. The original task of Adam was to take dominion over the earth. In Genesis 1, 26 to 28, you have that original dominion mandate for Adam, and that's worth reading here. This is in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Well, then, turn to Genesis 8 once again, and look at verse 16, and see what is said to Noah. Go out from the ark, you and your wife, and your sons wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swarm on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. Now, the animals are going to multiply, but in particular, Adam is called once again to take dominion over the earth. Noah, rather. Noah is called to take dominion over the earth, just like Adam was. Now, when Adam sinned, what did God do in response to Adam's sin? Adam cursed the earth. He cursed the ground. We read about the curse in Genesis 3, verses 17 to 19. This is God speaking to Adam. And he said, because you have listened to the voice of your wife, and have eaten of the tree of which I commanded you, you shall not eat of it. Cursed is the ground because of you. In pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for you, and you shall eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread, till you return to the ground. For out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Because of Adam's sin, not only will he die, which would not have been the case had he not sinned, but the entirety of creation is cursed. There's a curse placed on the earth. And that means that the world will not yield to man in the way it would have originally. There's going to be very much difficulty in trying to take dominion over the earth. It's hard. It's hard work, and it's not even just that it's hard, but it's painful. There's an element of pain introduced into trying to take dominion over the earth. There's even an element of disorder that's been introduced into the world. I was talking during the break with someone, and we were talking about a blight on certain trees in the area. And this is a great aspect of God's beautiful creation, trees that can be used for creating wonderful things in the world, even just trees that display God's glory, and yet they can get diseases and they can be destroyed. That's because of sin. That's because of the curse that was placed on creation originally. And so God's people are waiting for the curse to be overturned. I already mentioned Lamech naming Noah, rest, sounding like rest. I'm wondering, is this the one who will give us rest from our toil? Because creation has become hard, it's become difficult, it's become a toil. And he's wondering, maybe the seed is coming. Maybe Noah, maybe my own son is going to be the one who gives us rest. And even though it turns out that Noah doesn't ultimately give God's people the rest that they're waiting for, Noah is used by God to give us this powerful picture of the new creational work that he's going to do. And one of those ways is even seen in the idea of the curse, right? This curse that's been placed on the ground. God doesn't overturn the curse after he has flooded the world. He's flooded the world, and this new world emerges, and now man is given the dominion mandate once again, told to begin again, really. It's a new creation. Start over, take dominion, spread the glory of God over the whole face of the earth. The animals will then fill the earth. Man will fill the earth. Is the curse once and for all finally going to be overturned? Well, no, not yet. And yet we still read in Genesis 8, starting in verse 20, we read this. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night, shall not cease. The curse is not once and for all overturned, and yet there is a kind of mitigation of the curse. There's this promise that the curse will not totally overwhelm man. It's not going to prevent God from accomplishing his purposes. It's not going to prevent man from being a part of that, man from going out into the world and doing what God has called him to do. I think it's a way of showing us powerfully that the taking dominion over the earth and the spreading of the temple presence of God over the earth, it's going to be possible. God's going to be with man. He's going to enable man to do this. He is going to he's going to prevent the curse from completely overwhelming him. God's not going to destroy the world again. He's not going to judge the world again in this way until the very end. He's going to give time and space for man to get about that work, right? That work of building the temple, of spreading the glory of God over the whole face of the earth, of living in this new creation that God has made and doing the work that God intends. That work that Adam should have done, but Adam failed to do. You'll notice here that it's very powerfully shown to be a work of redemption now. It's a work of God, right? Because Noah can't even begin to do this work without offering sacrifices, because he's a sinner, and because his wife is a sinner, and his children are sinners, and so they have to be forgiven of their sin. They can't even come into the presence of God without having sacrifice, having their sins forgiven, and then beginning to do that work that God has called man to do. So the flood story it's a very powerful image, or even I would say a foreshadowing of the ultimate new creation. The flood isn't the final new creation. If it was, then God would have overturned all of the effects of sin. If it was, then God would have made sure that man was brought into the final rest, the eternal Sabbath rest of God, where there's no more sin, there's no more sickness, there's no more destruction in the created order. And that obviously doesn't happen after the flood, but it's still a really powerful picture of what God is going to do. It's a little glimpse of the new creation that's coming. I think that's just a powerful way to continue to give the people of God at that time, and then throughout all of history as they look back to that, to give them hope, to give them this reminder that God is not finished with the world, that God is going to do that work in the world. He's going to bring it about. So it's a powerful foreshadowing of the ultimate new creation. We then see that in the Old Testament, in other places, maybe not quite as dramatically as with the flood. If you remember, I mentioned Peter. In 2 Peter chapter 3, Peter says that it was an entirely new world that emerged from the flood. And he doesn't mean that God somehow disintegrated this world and remade a world, but in terms of God's plan for the world, it really was a new creation. In the Exodus, we see some glimpses of this as well. When Israel has gone down into bondage in Egypt, and the Lord rescues Israel from its bondage in Egypt, and then they pass through the waters of the Red Sea. We read this. This is Exodus 14, verse 21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea by a strong east wind, interesting, the wind blowing, all night, and made the sea dry land. And the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground. And it's that exact same word of the dry land, the dry ground that emerged out of the waters at creation. It's the same word for the dry ground that emerges out of the flood. And so that the wind blows. They pass through on dry land. They pass through in the midst of dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. I think it's a more faint picture of this new creation, but it's another reminder, right, that God is still doing his work of new creation. He is advancing his purposes in the world, and he's advancing his purposes through his people, through Israel. Now, the purpose of the Exodus was not just to rescue Israel. Israel was in bondage. Israel was groaning in its bondage. They're crying out to the Lord. They're desiring to be rescued. And the Lord hears their cry. He hears their groaning. He remembers his covenant, and he saves his people. But there's something more ultimate in that salvation that's brought about for Israel. Repeatedly, when Moses is standing before Pharaoh and he's confronting Pharaoh, and God is confronting Pharaoh through Moses, Moses says, "Let my people go," and he's speaking for God there. Of course, God's the one saying that. "Let my people go." Why? Why does God command that Pharaoh let his people go? Because it's bad that they're enslaved? No, that's not actually the reason. The reason, as we see repeatedly, but here's just one example, Exodus 7:16. This is what God says to Moses to say to Pharaoh. You shall say to Pharaoh, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But so far you've not obeyed. That language of service is actually the language of priestly service. Over and over and over, you see that the purpose of the Exodus is that Israel would be rescued, even in an act of new creation. God would bring them through the waters into the dry land. The dry land once again would emerge so that Israel might worship the Lord, that they might worship the Lord in the wilderness. That's the reason for the Exodus, is that God once again would be worshipped as he should be, that he would be worshipped by his people and glorified by his people. So think about the original purposes of creation that we've seen. Creation as a temple. Well, God is going to do an act of new creation for Israel. He's going to bring them through the waters. The waters are going to recede. The dry land emerges, and they're brought through in this act of redemption. And they're brought through where? They're brought through into the wilderness to come to God, to worship him, ultimately to worship him in the tabernacle that will be created. So it's once again, it's just an image in the Old Testament showing us that God is moving his plan forward. And what that plan is, right? It will require an act of new creation. God is going to have to make things new. His people are not capable of that anymore. God is going to have to make things new. And when he does so, he will do so for the purpose of being magnified and glorified among his people. I think even the entrance into the promised land is described in very similar ways. This is in Joshua chapter 3. When the priests who are carrying the ark, they come near to the waters part. The Ark of the Covenant goes down into the waters, and the waters part. And the Ark of the Covenant is the powerful symbol of God's presence. Where does the Ark of the Covenant end up? In the Holy of Holies, in the temple. So the priests, they take that Ark of the Covenant, they go down into the waters part, the waters stand in a heap, we read, and they pass through once again on dry ground. Joshua says this when they've passed through in Joshua 4, 23 and 24. It says, for the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which dried up for us until we passed over. So he's taking you back to the Red Sea, and the Red Sea passing is taking you back to the original creation. So Joshua then says, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever. The Exodus brings the people of God into the promised land. What we're going to see eventually in the prophets and then fulfilled in Christ is that there is a new Exodus for God's people that brings them into the new creation. What's happening in the Old Testament is that God is preparing his people. He is sustaining his people. He's giving them hope. He's helping them to see that he is not finished, that his plan of redemption is moving forward, that he is one day going to do a final act of new creation. Right? This is to sustain them in the midst of living in a fallen world, that God is not finished, right? That he's not left the world to go to its own purposes, to remain cursed forever. It's to remind them that he has not given up on his original purposes for the world. And yet also that he is the one that must do this work of redemption. Only God can do it now. Only God can do it. So that's one way that God shows his people this in the Old Testament. The second powerful way is found in looking at the prophets. When we turn to the prophets, we see really remarkable images in the prophets of a day that's coming. The prophets were preachers of the gospel. They were preachers of repentance and faith. But they were also preachers of the coming salvation of God. they often point the people of God to some day off in the future. They'll say, the day of the Lord is coming, or they'll say, in the latter days, God is going to do all these amazing things. And one of the things that the prophets show us is that in those latter days, God is going to do, He's going to accomplish an act of new creation once and for all. So it won't just be little glimpses of new creation. It's going to be the final bringing in of new creation. Right? It's these images that show the people of God that this fallen world, this world of sin and misery and death, is not final. Right? The day will come when God will bring an end to all of this misery. He will bring an end to creation itself kind of fighting against God's people. He will bring an end to the curse once and for all. Now, we can see this all throughout the Old Testament, but I think the prophet Isaiah gives us some of the most powerful images of this new creation. In fact, if you want to turn to Isaiah chapter 35, you'll see it's an entire chapter in Isaiah devoted to the new creation. This is starting in verse 1 of Isaiah 35. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who have an anxious heart, be strong, fear not. Behold, your God will come with vengeance, with the recompense of God. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. Then shall the lame man leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute sing for joy. For waters break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. In the haunt of jackals, there where they lie down, the grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it. It shall belong to those who walk on the way. Even if they are fools, they shall not go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. They shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain gladness and joy, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. You know, what a powerful image of the day that's coming, right? When God is going to make all things new. The wilderness will be turned into a place of abundant, majestic growth of flowers, and plants will be blooming everywhere. There will be just an explosion of plants in what was formerly a desert, and waters will be bursting forth from the ground. The desert is going to be transformed. I think the desert is an image of spiritual dryness. You know, it's an image of the ravages of sin on the world. And that's going to be overcome. Right? Animals are going to be everywhere, and there's going to be peace in the animal kingdom. The people of God are going to be brought through this desert, even really in a new exodus. They're going to be brought out of their bondage to sin in a new and final exodus. They're going to be brought into the promised land. There's going to be nothing that will be unclean, nothing sinful in this new creation. Human bodies will be healed, and this is going to be really important for the next talk. And some of you might have even had some things kind of ringing in your ears when I was reading this about what Jesus says in his own ministry about the overturning of the effects of sin, because Jesus quotes from this very chapter when he is responding to those who are asking him if he's the Messiah. He's saying, I am bringing about this new creation. There are so many images. We could spend hours looking at all of the images in the prophets. We don't have time to do that. So I wanted to look at one of the most extensive and powerful images of that. But the prophet Isaiah also, in multiple places, he refers to the new heavens and the new earth, the new creation that's coming. And this is one of them. He doesn't use that language here, but this is one of those places. Isaiah 65. Verse 17, for behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind. Or Isaiah 66, verse 22, for as the new heavens and the new earth that I make shall remain before me, says the Lord, so shall your offspring and your name remain. And if we were to jump around in the different prophets in the Old Testament, we have the language in Joel chapter 3, verse 18, of the mountains dripping with sweet wine. In Amos 9, 13 to 15, we have this remarkable image of a plowman who overtakes the reaper and the treader of grapes who sows the seed. If you start to think about that, it doesn't even make sense in an earthly sense. A plowman is overtaking the reaper. That means that the man who's out there reaping the harvest is being overtaken by the person who's plowing in order to plant new crops. He passes up the one who's trying to bring the old crops in to plant new crops. Right? In an earthly sense, you can't even do that. But the purpose of the image, I think, is to make us think that. I mean, to think how amazing this is when God is going to do this work of new creation. It's going to be so staggering what God is going to do that you have to come up with these amazing images to describe it. The world is going to be made right. It's going to be so amazing. Everything is going to be in its right place. Everything is exactly as God intended. Everything is abundant. The mountains are just dripping with this sweet wine. You have the language in the prophets of swords being turned into plowshares. Right? That's Isaiah chapter 2 and other places. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. You don't need the weapons of war any longer. You turn the weapons of war into tools to help you harvest this abundance that the Lord is creating for his people. Micah chapter 4 says the same thing, beating their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. We have the image of the New Jerusalem. We see that in Isaiah, we see that in Ezekiel, in Zechariah. Isaiah chapter 1, verses 24 to 26. Therefore the Lord declares, the Lord of hosts, the mighty one of Israel, I will get relief from my enemies and avenge myself on my foes. I will turn my hand against you and will smelt away your dross as with lye and remove all your alloy. And I will restore your judges as at the first, and your counselors as at the beginning. Afterward, you shall be called the city of righteousness, the faithful city. And he's referring to the restoration of Jerusalem. There's a day coming when God is going to restore Jerusalem. There's that wonderful image in Ezekiel, and it's very long. It's Ezekiel 40 to 48. It's that wonderful picture of the final temple of God, right? When he restores the temple to what it should be. There's going to be this dramatic outpouring of God's Holy Spirit in these latter days. Ezekiel as well. Ezekiel 36 and 37, the vision of dry bones taking on flesh and resurrection life and the Spirit being poured out on the people of God. And then this is just scratching the surface of the prophets. I mean, if you go in, you see many more amazing images of new creation, of what God's going to do, how he's going to change the world, how he's going to make everything right. He is going to overcome all of the effects of sin. He is going to forgive the sins of his people. He's going to restore his people to the land. He's going to bring them into the New Jerusalem. He's going to reestablish his temple and bring his people to worship at the temple. And really, I think that's the most ultimate one. It is a new Exodus. He will finally bring his people out of their true bondage, their true misery, which is bondage to sin. Our own bondage to sin. He will once and for all rescue his people from sin and all of its effects. He will forgive the sins of his people. He will pour out his Holy Spirit to enable his people to turn to him and to love him and to serve him. He will bring his people through this Exodus. He will cause the land to blossom. He will bring about a new creation. He will bring his people once again to the temple to worship him. God's purposes at the original creation are going to be brought about through the work of God. And so the people of God, they hear Isaiah, they hear Joel, they hear Ezekiel preaching these wonderful messages of the coming day of the Lord, of what's going to happen in the latter days. And that would sustain them. That would give them hope to look away from the remaining effects of sin, to look away from the misery that they still live in, and to look forward to that glorious day, and to have hope that God will redeem, and that God will fix what has been made wrong in sin, that God will restore the earth, that he will bring the earth to be into that state that he originally intended for it. And as I close this morning, just some further reflections on how significant this is for Christians, how practical this is, really. First of all, it's just a powerful reminder that new creation is God's work. New creation is God's work. God is going to still use man to bring about his new creation, but new creation is God's work. He must do it because we are sinners and we live in a fallen world. So those powerful images, the flood and moving through the Jordan River to go into the land, that reminds God's people that new creation is God's work. The prophetic images throughout the prophets, they show us one thing negatively. They show us that we have to be careful to not interpret this language in an excessively kind of materialistic way. This is one of the dangers of talking about new creation. I mentioned this in the last talk, that we can swing that pendulum from we reject creation and we say creation is tainted by sin and we have to reject it. We swing the pendulum all the way back to the other side and we lose sight of God and his glory as being the most central reality to creation. And we just enjoy the gifts and we forget about the giver. That's always the danger for the Christian. The images in the prophets, they help us with that when they show us that new creation, it is going to be a restoration of this world. We can sometimes think as Christians that we're just going to be floating around on clouds, right? We're going to be disembodied spirits for all of eternity. You know, the old Looney Tunes cartoons, they're floating up in the clouds, they're playing their harps, and I think a lot of people had their image of eternity shaped in that way, and they think that's what it's going to be like. Now, God's going to restore this world. He's going to make this world new. But we do have to be careful that we don't assume that the material reality of this world is the most ultimate thing. Right? The most ultimate thing is God. If you take those images in the prophets, right, the plowman is overtaking the reaper, you realize that these are not physically possible. They're meant to show us that God is going to do something amazing and dramatic, rather than making us think, okay, it's just going to be this amazing place to live, and we're going to get to have everything we want in this world, and kind of you get fixated on maybe I get to do all the things I love now, but then, right? It helps us keep our focus on God in these images, God's work of salvation for us. But positively, the prophets, they help us to see what is most important. You know what you need more than anything? It's not to be able to climb mountains and to surf and do all the things that you enjoy in this creation, but rather that the effects of sin would be overcome. And that's what the prophets focus on. And so it's an important reminder. Death will be overcome. Sickness and war and famine and all these things will be overcome. And then there will be this abundance of goodness, right? An abundance of goodness, ultimate goodness. Right? The world's just teeming with animals, vegetation, food and drink. God is there, though, and He is there gloriously. And the people of God worship Him as they were intended to do in the original creation. So that's the end of our second talk. Now, I could open up for a couple minutes of questions this time. I was going to do that last time, but I forgot. So if there happen to be some. Yep.
You emphasize God doesn't have a plan B.
Yep.
Well, that's right. But another teaching that I've heard through the decades of my life is that the redeemed sinner is in a better position than a faithful Adam.
Yep.
And that God's glory, God is more glorified through a redeemed sinner than a faithful Adam. Can you speak to that in terms of...
Right, yeah, so I think that's exactly right, that a redeemed sinner is in a better place than created Adam originally. I mean, the main reason for that is because those whom God redeems, He will hold them fast to the very end. And Adam had the possibility of falling. Whereas for those who are redeemed in Christ, He will preserve them to the very end. And He will not allow them to fall the way Adam fell. But there's more to it than that, in that Adam had not yet entered into the fullness of the new creation. That was something that he would have entered into had he been faithful, and he could have entered into that. And so even though we have not, and this is something we'll talk about later, but we have not entered into the fullness of new creation either, but the new creation has come in Christ. And we are participating in that new creation in Christ even now, even as we wait for the new world. And so I think in that sense, we've already entered into an advancement over Adam as well. Yeah, so that's exactly right. We have something even greater than him. And of course, when we enter into the fullness of the new creation, we'll finally enter into what God had intended for Adam. And so it's not plan B, because the end point, the end goal is exactly what God had at least intended for Adam. And I say intended, not that God's plan changed, but that's what He held out for him. And that's what we will arrive at in the new creation. And so that's not a plan B. That's always been God's intention. He does have to now accomplish that through His own redemption, though, because of sin. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The Old Testament seems to have a real display of destruction of the temple, failure of Israel and Judah, the apostasy, and all of these plans and purposes of God building a new creation and redeeming a lost world. His purposes in suffering and failure and loss. The Old Testament is focused on that. Those just seem to be so conflicting. Of God using the means. It wasn't just that Israel and Judah were failing to do God's will, but my best understanding of God was purposing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, in His providence, God put, you could use the language of trials. I mean, He put Israel through those trials. I mean, but that's a response to their sin, of course, their rebellion against Him, that they have to go through all of that misery. But I mean, in the plan of God, that was always the intention of God. I mean, in a way, that just reinforces this idea that if they're going to enjoy the new temple, the new creation, God's going to have to be the one who does it, because they're not capable of that. They show that repeatedly in their rebellion, in their sin, and in the misery that they bring into their lives. Yeah. Hmm?
Emphasize Adam as a priest
Yep.
in the garden sanctuary.
Yeah.
What about Adam as the king? And
Yeah.
are there glimpses of kind of throne and temple?
Yeah.
As a glimpse of new creation, if you could stick a little bit. That, and it may
Yeah.
be something you're going to.
Well, actually, that kind of defines my next talk, interestingly enough, because Jesus as the new Adam is the king. And so there's a very important, that's exactly right, there's a very important connection between kingship and the temple, even at creation, because Adam is a king. He is told to take dominion over the earth. So he's not just a priest, he is also a king. And the way in which he extends the temple presence over the earth, or he would have been as a king ruling and taking dominion over the earth. So those go hand in hand, and that's really important. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, well, I don't see any more hands.